I'm so excited to bring you Carey Heller today. We're going to talk about strategizing to improve productivity and efficiency. Carey is a psychologist and specializes in ADHD and executive function issues. He helps get people organized to plan to be productive while also managing anxiety, low self-esteem, and other things that can interfere with our ultimate success. I know all of our listeners' hands just went in and said, yes, please tell me more. Hello, Carey.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me. It's great to be here. I'm happy to share what I can, figure out how to do some things that will help you to be more productive, efficient, and hopefully be happier, less stressed along the way.
I love it. We all need you. Go into your background. And my question is, did you always know where you wanted to specialize, or was this a journey for you of how you got where you are today?
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in ADHD and executive function issues. So half my practice is evaluation, so formal testing to diagnose ADHD, learning disabilities, related issues. So essentially testing that oftentimes kids would use for purposes of getting accommodations. Adults would sometimes use either for that, or if, let's say, you're in therapy and therapist isn't quite sure, where do we go from here? It's also sometimes used to help further guide treatment. So half the practice is sort of the evaluation piece to figure out what's going on, because you want to get a clear picture of what's going on in order to figure out what are you trying to target in terms of trying to make things better. And then the other part of that is treatment. And so I often blend traditional talk therapy with executive function coaching, or ADHD coaching, basically focusing on practical time management, organization, and certainly for kids, study strategies, and for adults, figure out how do you balance things between personal life and work and have some sanity along the way.
And again, that goes back to we can all use you.
Right. I mean, no matter how good you are at stuff, there's always room for improvement. Part of it also is we never evaluate, is what I'm doing working? Like usually if it's not working and it's really bad, you're aware of it. But if things could be better, even just thinking about, how do you check email? Do you feel like you spend way too long deciding the wording, whereas you could probably convey the same thing in an appropriate way in maybe half the time? You always just want to evaluate whatever you're doing to figure out, am I doing this efficiently enough, balancing that with the quality.
I'm going to give a real life example that's pertinent in my coaching business right now, just to kind of jumpstart this as well. That I walk and talk with a client, and she uses me as a coach. So we're always talking about life goals, nutrition goals, fitness goals. And then she always goes, but I have this extra layer. So she takes what we're talking about. And then she is somebody that lives with ADHD. And she goes, I feel like I always have to take what we're talking about and put almost a new lens on it, or a new expectation of how I'm going to go about getting this done, which goes into this efficiency and planning part. What are some of your examples with clients who are tackling nutrition or exercise, and where you can see them getting hung up, those barriers, and how do you guide them around those barriers?
Sure. So, I think you brought up a really good point that, for a lot of people with ADHD, and obviously even those without it too, oftentimes the follow through is the hardest part. So even if you know exactly what you should be doing, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be able to follow through. So if it's, making good choices in terms of eating healthy, if it's writing down food in a food log, remember to check email frequently enough, whatever it is, oftentimes people need a system to use. But you can't just pick a system from a book or online and say, oh, I'm going to use the system, because it's going to oftentimes be hard to implement it yourself. And that's where I think especially ADHD becomes especially hard, because if stuff's not natural, if it's not a natural inclination, oh, I should use this strategy, in itself, it's going to be harder to follow through on. And then also a lot of times with ADHD, once you establish a routine, it's very easy. If you get thrown off in some way, it's hard to kind of pick back up and get back on track with it. So, that's the other big thing I see is that if someone finally gets down a strategy, oh, I'm going to do it this way, or I'm going to remember to take my medicine, whatever it is, go on a vacation, it's a long weekend, whatever it is, the things like that can oftentimes really throw off the ability to maintain those routines that people want to do in order to be healthier or accomplish whatever they'd like to.
Right.
So I have to answer that second part of the question about what do you do? So a lot of it, first of all, is you have to oftentimes start small. In terms of anytime you're working with someone, you need to figure out what are they capable of following through on their own. My approach is not to say, you have to do stuff in one specific way. I often like to explore with people, what have they tried? What's worked? What hasn't? What is the goal? And then work backwards to figure out what are different strategies you could use to accomplish that. But from there to then figure out what's their goals. What do they want to try to do in terms of strategy? Where are the potential pitfalls along the way that might stop them? And then what do we do to help them to be able to follow through on?
Okay. And I hope our listeners are hearing this loud and clear, because this conversation continues to come around. It is an individualized journey, whether we are talking with you or we are talking around any other subject. And I feel like we naturally come in always wanting this perfect answer, this magic bullet. And the reality is, like you're stating here, it's individual. I can't just give you this blank statement of this will work for you until you understand them as an individual, right?
Right, exactly. Things I see very commonly is that someone finds an app of some kind, that, whether it's like a task list or some sort of comprehensive planner app, and tries it out and then keeps going from one to the other, and it's just not working, or they feel like I should be able to just use this app, but I can't get myself to do it. The issue in that case is basically you're trying to sort of fit your own needs into something that's preset without actually figuring out, is this preset thing actually a good fit for your needs?
Right.
Plus also, even if the app you pick is a good fit, sometimes you have to get a routine and figure out how to do it to make the app useful. Because in most cases, if you're cycling from one app to another, oftentimes they're usually more similar than they are different. So it's often about how you're implementing it. Probably that's going to be the bigger issue to work through than the app itself in most cases.
I love this example. Can you give us more? The app is just one. What else you keep seeing that's common amongst your clients?
I mean, oftentimes, common things I see are putting stuff in a to-do list to start and then kind of falling off gradually in terms of not putting stuff in and then completely abandoning it, or having taken all this time to put in stuff to organize themselves and then completely forgetting about it, getting thrown off in some way, and then just not using whatever systems they have that are helpful. But at the same time, the common comment is, "Oh, this is actually so helpful. If only I'd use it."
Right. Well, the common thing that I always hear is, I know what to do. I just need to do it. I know it, but I'm not doing it. So you're helping on the here's how we do it part.
Right. And there are times too where it's also, I'll work with people during sessions to actually work on getting stuff done. It's not just about all the abstract, here's how to planning, but if you look at why isn't something getting done? So is it overwhelming? Is it really difficult? So sometimes that can also be a factor that gets at, why aren't you getting a task done? They need to get done. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a matter of looking at the directions together, even getting started on it during a session to have that emotional support to be able to work through it. So if it starts to get tough and you're someone that likes to kind of just ignore stuff when it's really tough, having that ability to kind of do it in the moment can sometimes help to get through. So even if it's something you finish on your own, it's easier because you already have gotten started on it.
Right. Exactly. Do you work with both children and adults?
Yeah, I work with children, teens, and adults.
Wow. Okay. Let's go through some samples of what a session would look like with you. And are you working both virtual as well as in person?
I mean, currently with the pandemic, it's all virtual, but normally I have a physical office, which I still have, and anticipate on seeing people in person again whenever things are a place good enough for me to feel comfortable doing that. So it'll probably be sort of a hybrid model. I mean, I've done virtual sessions even before the pandemic, and I'll continue that. So I'm used to sort of seeing people both, in person and virtual. So obviously how you set up stuff's a little bit different, but sometimes I think even the virtual ends up being better for a lot of reasons. Like a lot of times in my office, someone would either bring their own computer in or a tablet or their phone, and we sync it to hook up to my Apple TV so I could see whatever they were seeing on their screen. Virtual, it's just click the screen share button and it's all right there.
Why is it so important for you both to be on a screen? What are you looking at?
So a lot of times, like with kids, it's often looking at their school portal to see what assignments they have, to look at the planning or their calendar or task list. With adults, it's organizing email or looking at a task list or helping get organized to do research on something. It's really tangible. First of all, if all I did was talk with someone and then the session ended and we never looked at anything, there's nothing that's ever written down, chances are probably someone's not going to remember half, if not 2/3 of whatever we talked about during the session. And so that's where I think having the direct visual piece in of itself helps people be more engaged. But also, I write up notes as we go and I either share with people during the session if they want that visual to stay better engaged, or email it after. But the idea is in my office, it would be looking at the notes, if not something we're physically pulling up, or, after the session, they would email. But the idea really is that you have to keep people engaged, but also have an easy way to remember stuff. I'll often encourage people to write stuff down themselves, and we'll over time work on having them keep their own notes so that they can refer back to it. If it's just talking and there's no focus on a way of writing it down, continue to get into sort of this parallel process in a sense of, I'm doing the same thing in the session that I do at home or at work. I talk about this stuff, I never write down, but then I don't remember to follow through on it. Right. So I like to sort of use all sorts of, here and now moments during sessions to in a gentle way model or illustrate, different things that people can be doing that can be helpful. Another piece of ADHD is oftentimes a lot of people have a hard time sitting still. I mean, more so with children and teens, but there are definitely adults that are quite restless too. And so that's where then we look at in the moment, if that's occurring, how do we help whoever it is to be able to sit still better? Because that in turn can actually improve focus. Because if someone's not optimally focused, especially the hyperactivity piece, are more likely to fidget. But if you can actually harness the fidgeting to trick your mind into thinking you're more interested in something than you are and turn improve focus. So that's where in my office, I have a desk elliptical and a bike and a bunch of other stuff that people like to use during sessions to stay focused. The virtual piece, show them all different stuff. And, a lot of people go out and get this stuff on their own for session.
Yeah. Okay. You're unique though in this, or maybe I'm not exposed. I'm a dietitian and I feel like I have a great love of psychology. I feel like it's like a missing component. We all should be double majoring if we go into the nutrition side of it. Okay. So I just need you to know I do love me some therapy. I do not feel like when I am talking to clients who are doing therapy that they're always getting tangible takeaways. And then on the flip side of that, even if they are getting some goals set when they come back in, those aren't even always reviewed and followed through with. So my question to you is, would it be worth somebody having a therapist as well as a coach on their side, or should this be more built in? Are they not finding the right therapist for them?
I mean, that's a good question. To answer the first part, I think as far as I know, I'm pretty unique in what I do. I don't know many people that do stuff that can the same way of like blending the two. I think in general, I think you always want to figure out who's, knowledgeable enough on whatever you're having trouble with to be the most helpful person. And that's where I think sometimes there's this disconnect. Because on the one hand, a lot of time therapists may not necessarily have specialized training in ADHD, or it's more focused on kind of the feelings, emotions, and not so much on the tangible action items of how do you get stuff done. I think you kind of need both probably to be most successful at getting stuff done and, sort of improving, various aspects of, life that are impacted by ADHD. But I think the problem is that if you don't have a therapist that can sort of focus enough on the hands-on piece of it, I think that's where having a coach that comes in can be really helpful. On the other side of it too, if you just have a coach who's focusing on the application of here's how you do stuff, first of all, if they don't have enough of a background in ADHD to understand that this is not something that you just tell someone what to do and then they do it, that itself is going to be hard. But I think a lot of times the emotional piece can sometimes come out even more when you're working on the practical stuff. Because if someone's had a long-term history of having trouble with all this stuff, it can bring up a lot, really taking action to sort of make things better. And so I think that's in a perfect world. I think either having, someone that can do both or, a coach and a therapist, and ideally the two of them collaborating, I think would be most helpful. That's something I do a lot in my work is, there's some people I see where I essentially do both the therapy and the coaching together. There are others where, they're already working with a therapist on a lot of stuff and I just do the executive functioning piece. Or, right. In some cases where I just do the therapy, if they're already working with executive function coach, or in general, if that makes more sense for whatever reason. So it's all about finding the right fit, figuring out, who's going to be most helpful to you for your needs. But to, ask the right question, what do you know about ADHD? What does your treatment approach look like? And even if you're not looking at ADHD, therapists have very different theoretical orientations on how they approach things. There are some that are going to be more structured. And there are ones where, it's more psychodynamic, kind of getting really at the root of stuff, which I think is really, really helpful in a lot of ways. But, everyone's going to vary in how focused on goals they are. There may be some where it's talk about goals at the beginning, it's written down, it's constantly checked to see are we achieving this, where there are others where it's, maybe they kind of set a little bit of a goal at the beginning, but then there's never really a checkup or things keep coming up. So there's not really focusing going back to what are we working on.
Right. And then kind of round and round we go sometimes.
Some people I've talked to that have, been in therapy for a while feel if I just kind of go in and talk, I don't know what I'm really getting out of it. And it's hard because I think there are times where I think people get a lot out of treatment and just don't always realize it in the moment. It may change their mindset, maybe becoming more positive with things, or maybe they're approaching situations differently. But unless you have that tangible evidence, I think it's hard for people to see those changes firsthand. Whereas the type of work that I do, if I set a tangible goal of, for kids, let's say they come in and they're missing, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 assignments in the course of a 2 or 3 week period. Maybe we set a goal of no more than 5 missing assignments in a week. And then we get down to 1 and 0. And so something like that, it's obviously very easy to measure, especially with school portals. It's very easy to see itemized. There's not really a whole lot of ambiguity about it.
Right.
Or with adults looking at, if the follow through on, the tasks we have set. So if we say you're going to do these 3 things, then we can easily check next time, did they do those 3 things, as long as they're obviously honest about it.
Right. And do you have another process too of like, I always talk about acknowledging our wins. You're going back through and viewing it with them. Do you have ways that you have your clients make sure they're doing that for themselves as well?
Yeah. That's my ultimate goal. Because, as much as I enjoy working with people, my goal is not to work with them forever. The idea is to work with them long enough that I help them to do it on their own. So in the same way that, my sessions with people serve as sort of a check-in in a way, the idea is for them to start setting that up on their own. And so I will work with people on that, where we'll start, setting up a time where they review whatever they're supposed to be doing. So whether it's looking at their tasks for the day, evaluating, what's working, what's not. And, a lot of cases, even like creating a template or something that they can fill out. A lot of times if someone says, oh, I'm just going to check with myself, and it's oftentimes people are not, it's the same thing with studying. If someone quizzes themselves and they look at a word and think, oh, I know the definition, there's a good chance that if you ask them to explain it out loud, when they think they know it, they don't actually know it as well as they think they do. So it's kind of the same thing, where you have to have a tangible way to truly evaluate what you're actually doing to determine if you're actually getting better at accomplishing the goal. Whereas it's just, if you look at it and think, oh, I'm doing this, it's not really a fair assessment.
I don't want to forget to ask you this. You've mentioned this term a couple of times, executive function. Can you go into that for our listeners who have never heard that?
Sure, absolutely. Like on a practical level, it means it's a set of mental processes that are involved in pretty much most aspects of completion of a task. So in terms of planning, organizing, getting started, keeping track of deadlines, finishing. A tangible example would be if you think about a car factory. So a car factory has a control room where they have all the robots that are controlling the different pieces. So you have, let's say, one that's putting the windshield on, another's putting the wheels on, one's putting the body on. And at the end, you have one that does whatever the final touches are to make a complete car. And so essentially, there's a control room controlling all of that. And the mind, essentially, the executive functioning processes, are essentially the control center of the brain. And so if you think about completion of a task, so if you have to complete some sort of report or something, the act of doing the research, planning out in advance of the deadline, what you need to do, doing the research, synthesizing it, putting it all together, you're essentially looking at planning, working memory, organization, putting it all together to create the finished product. So it's kind of what executive functioning in a nutshell is.
Yeah. So let's even go a different example. If somebody was just wanting to switch careers and they're really like flipping back and forth, do I stay where I am? Do I want to switch? Blah, blah. There is a process to working through this. I call it decision fatigue.
So if you think about something that's really open-ended, like looking for exploring new careers, or even just searching for a new job in general, even if it's in the same field, for a lot of people, it's hard to know where do you start and how do you go in some sort of systematic way in order to accomplish the goal. Because if you just aimlessly search the web thinking, oh, what could I look at? And just see what pops through and try to figure out, oh, that looks like a fun career, that one or that one. You're going to probably spend a lot of time, not be very efficient. You may not even come across what actually might be a good fit. Whereas if you started by, taking some sort of assessment set that looks at your skill set and your interests, and then gives you, even if it's 30 possible careers to then explore, then it's a systematic process where you look through those, maybe you mark off 10 that are really interesting, then you start looking at jobs in those 10 fields, see what's available, maybe write off 2 of them because that kind of stuff is just not even relevant in where you live. And then, you're down to, let's say, 8 possible career options, and then you can kind of parcel it down from there. Whereas that obviously be a far more systematic way of trying to change careers.
Yes. And I think that people forget the importance of, to your point, when you have somebody like you checking back in or me checking back in, you work your way through those processes because you're going to answer back to somebody, versus we can know a process and just kind of let it die out, fizzle out in the middle of the process just because life happens, life gets in the way, barriers pop up. So I love any opportunity to keep reinforcing to our listeners that accountability piece is a really big deal. And I wonder if you could also speak into this. A lot of individuals feel like it may be weak to ask for help, or it may be, why do I need to spend money to have somebody help work me through this process? Where does your talk go with that?
Sure. So first of all, it depends what you want to accomplish. And if you're able to do this yourself and you're seeing the results you want, then that's great. Mm-hmm. But if you feel like you've continued to try and you're not accomplishing what you want, then the question to determine, is it worth a meeting with someone that's going to help you to accomplish that? Whether it's, because you can't do it yourself at all, or it's much slower going on your own. And think about the time involved. It's a process. You're not going to magically fix everything in one session. But even if you meet with someone for, let's just say, 8 sessions over the course of 2 months or something, what you get out of those sessions, you may end up saving the any time you're losing from attending during the time of those sessions. And in turn, depending on what your goals are, but you may recoup all the money you essentially spent on it if you're more productive and you're making more money, especially if you have a commission-based job. In terms of adults I work with, there are a lot that, have their own companies or have jobs where, oftentimes their income is based on what they bring in, but they have a hard time keeping organized. And so they're not making as much as they would like to because they're not as productive as they want to be. And so, it's all balance, or sometimes it's not even all financial. You think about it that for some people, it's not having as many issues at home with their significant other. Would that, being better organized lead to less conflicts or less issues if you forget to pick up your kid from school because you're not organized? There are things like that obviously can have big ramifications, and sometimes just getting your own stuff together better can in turn make things go better at home for family as a whole.
Right. Ripples, right? Beautiful ripples of one thing leading into another. Just accidentally changing something and making it easier is my favorite. I'm going to throw out this, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but okay. So definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. This is where I feel like somebody building the insight that they're doing something like that could really benefit from coming to see someone like you.
I was a psychologist. I probably don't use the term insanity, but I use essentially the same principle of it, that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result unless you're changing it in some way. So it's, if you've been having trouble with this for so long and whatever you're doing is not working, or if you're not changing anything, of course, it's not going to get better magically.
Right. But we're all very guilty of it, whether it's coming to the same fitness program every day and expecting something to change, or our eating habits. I always shift back to nutrition and fitness, but it's a real struggle. A lot of people get in this feeling too of like, I'll exercise my eating habits and just keep beating down that door and not seeing results. So I love the idea of referrals, all of us using each other, so that if we are at that barrier, that just stagnant point there, I want our listeners to hear you. There's other areas to go to investigate, to build insight that you can start seeing results.
But you bring a really good point about like looking at it from like a holistic perspective too. That, for example, if you're a listener and you're focusing on wondering, how can I lose weight? Obviously, like the diet piece, I'll leave to you. But, in terms of other stuff, if you think about it, even if, let's say, you're following whatever the plan is and you're not seeing results, what else is going on? So certainly thinking about, fitness piece of it. Even if you're working out all the time, is there something different you can be doing about how you're working out that makes a difference, as an individual? Or are you so stressed or really anxious? Sometimes people can get physical symptoms when they're anxious in terms of, really tight muscles, stomach aches, headaches. And so all those things could in turn, be impeding one's ability, to lose weight.
No, beautifully said. What am I not asking you that I should be asking? Because I feel like you have so much wisdom for us.
Just think about general self-care. That, being able, getting enough sleep, eating healthy, getting physical activity, like all those things are going to help, not just if you have ADHD, but in general. But especially if you have ADHD, those things are going to make some difference. Because if you're as healthy as you can be, physical activity in itself can help increase focus. You're probably going to be, and sleep too. That a lot of times, I see, especially kids too, but adults, particularly with ADHD, that oftentimes are, up super late getting stuff done or just not paying attention to how much they're sleeping. Anyone that's not getting enough sleep, if you're really sleep deprived, essentially you're going to almost look like you have ADHD just from lack of focus because you're so tired. From like a sort of a planning perspective with sleep, like I often like to frame sleep as the idea that there's an appointment you have to attend. That's not like you're using whatever time's left over at the end of the day to sleep, but that's, you have these set hours and you can't book anything because you have to be there during those times. In this case, in your bed sleeping. In a lot of situations, you're going to actually function better. Even if you haven't done quite everything you want to get done, you're still probably going to feel better, be happier, more relaxed, and in turn, be more productive the next day if you get enough sleep.
Oh, that's so good. I've never heard it stated that way, and I love it. I think of fitness that way, like put it in your calendar so you can see it, block it out. But I've never thought about sleep that way, and it's perfect.
And the other thing also I'm thinking, like when you just mentioned about putting your calendar, is that also it's important to be realistic in what you plan out. Like I think putting stuff in a calendar is great, whether you sort of, have it in like a formalized way or just, informally. But the idea is if you plan stuff out, but if you put the workout at 12 p.m., that's great. But if you don't actually see if you're even free then, or if you have enough time to work out and change, then you kind of run into problems. Or if you, make a to-do list of stuff. A lot of times I hear people say, I make a list, but I never get it done. So why bother making a list? You have to have some flexibility because things may take longer than you anticipate. Things may come up. But the idea is trying to plan as realistic as you can to start can be helpful. So for example, making a list of stuff, but figuring out like based on how much time you have and estimating completion times of the different things you're planning to do, make sure it's likely to even to be feasible to get done in the time you've allotted for it.
Right. This goes back to individualized because you're hitting both areas that we have the person who does really well with the planning and loves seeing it on there and does well with margins of their planning. And then the other person who overdoes their to-do list. And then it can be detrimental to them thinking I failed if I don't get this list done. It's the same thing as diet mentality to me, as far as if we constantly keep our eyes on somebody else's paper instead of our own, and we feel like I should be doing that and I'm not doing that, we have to continue to make sure our tools in our tool bag are lifting us and making it a positive experience versus a negative experience. And that's where it's individualized. One thing can work great for one person, and to another, it's defeating.
Right, exactly.
So, if you were to wrap your arms around all of our listeners and just give them one huge bit of your, like, if you take nothing else away from this, this is what I need you to hear, what would that be?
I would say, pick something that you want to make an improvement on. And if it's helpful, write it down and then list out a couple of ways that you could do that. Because they're saying you want to change, you have to think tangibly in terms of what you could actually do. Like, for example, let's say even losing weight. That if you say I want to lose weight, like you want to have a clear picture of what does that look like. So does that mean meeting with a nutritionist, having a better workout routine? Because you're going to be able to measure the results and what's working and what's not working if you have a tangible tools that you're using to try to accomplish the goal. Whereas if it's really just abstract and very generalized, it's harder to find something tangible to follow through on. Like in the same way, if you say I want to be better at time management, I mean, that's great, but what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. Like, so then, for example, the idea would be maybe you're going to, have planning periods throughout the day. Or you're going to finish work at, 6 p.m. and, leave everything for tomorrow and have more family time. Like whatever it is, just you want to have a tangible way of measuring whatever you're trying to accomplish, because then you're going to know if you're achieving it or not. I would say the other big thing would be, try to have a positive mindset. That the idea is if you feel like, as long as you keep trying and you're doing, even if it's not working, as long as you're doing something different, you continue to try, you're eventually going to get there and probably have good success with making things better. But if you don't keep trying and trying to do something different, then you're probably going to keep doing the same thing over again without any, difference in what's going on.
I think, again, today's message is meant for hope. There are resources out there. There's a you out there. Thank you so much for your time today. So appreciate, again, all that you have to share, and just to open our eyes that there's a you that exists out in the world. That I think, again, that you're very unique, and I'm hoping that you're a trendsetter on what you offer. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
You're welcome. And thanks a lot for having me. This was great. It was fun chatting about this, and hope that all of you listening out there, that all of this is helpful, and that you can take some positives and make some tangible changes on your own from all this stuff today.
Agreed. Even if they just take one thing away, it was worth it, right?
Right.
Oh, have a great rest of your day.